Greetings, and good afternoon, Juneteenth family. Welcome to another weekly edition of our Lunch and Learn.
E is exhaling, having an opportunity to breathe, to rest, to refill yourself and rejuvenate yourself, because no one can pour from an empty cup.
As you evolve and become more of yourself, you begin to attract the people that are there for you.
Amen.
So everything you need is in the space.
You have to learn from your mistakes. Once you make a mistake, sit down, recoup, and then start over. And once you do that, you say, I got that.
See, Juneteenth means to me, I would definitely say empowerment and education.
When I experience it, like just coming together and, being a part of something bigger than myself,
A new start, starting a new chapter, opportunity, new beginnings, all of that good stuff.
Greetings, and good afternoon, Juneteenth family. Welcome to another weekly edition of our Lunch and Learn. This week, we're joined by Miss Bettye Walker, and we'll be talking about Black trauma and the realities of change. During Miss Walker's presentation, she'll be sharing insights on Black trauma and from the perspective of change, recovery, and relinquishing patterns of bad behavior. Let's bring Miss Walker up to the stage. Good afternoon.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
I'm well. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. So happy to have you here. As we talked about a little bit before you came on, before we went live, this is just such an important conversation. So I'm really looking forward to your presentation. I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself before you dive into your presentation, or before I pass over the stage completely to you. Let the folks know who you are and what you've been up to.
Sure. Well, again, my name is Bettye Walker. I'm the founder and sole proprietor of B. Walker Consultants. It's a consulting, counseling sort of service provider. And I offer comprehensive services and that cater around individuals based on human development, conflict resolution, mediation, mental health advocacy, and holistic counseling. So I've been in business for about 9 years, passionately pursuing my vision of building and connecting human capacity. So part of the reason that I was really fascinated about being a part of this discussion today is because back in 2020, after the COVID pandemic happened, I sort of went through a shift where I recognized that my community, the people and the places and the experiences that I come from, were suffering, and it was a conversations about trauma is something that we typically don't talk about a lot, whether it's in our families, in the church, in our communities. And I felt with all the skills, I tend to be probably a lot older than some of you all here in the audience, so I come with a lot of trauma that I have had to overcome and address for myself. But the beauty of it is that I learned some lessons out of, by the fact that I am older and have had some experiences in life, I found the lessons in the experiences. So I have a different perspective of trauma. And what I'm going to be talking to you all today about is really focusing more on not so much the causes, but to talk about how we can heal, how we can recover from it.
All right. Well, I love that. And with that being said, it's really not a lot more to say. I would love to see your presentation. Then we'll come back to the space and we'll share any questions that may be in the chat, or any questions I may have for you as well.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Have a great presentation. Thank you for being here.
Okay, I'm going to skip past the first because I've already talked about it. So let's talk about Black trauma in particular. Um, Trauma, as I said earlier, is one of those subjects that we don't talk a lot about within our families or amongst ourselves. And for me, I just find this kind of behavior oddly disturbing because really, when you look at all the things that we go through as a community, as families, um, it's really something that we do need to talk about, particularly when you think in terms of the complexity of Black trauma and what it is. So you would think that with all the conversations that we do have, that our emotional and our mental well-being would be at the forefront of our minds, but more often than not, it is not. And I wanted to make the conjecture that maybe the reason that we choose not to talk about it is because it conjures up too many painful memories and leaves us tired, depressed, and triggered. So for this reason alone, I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to spend time talking about causes, but I'm going to talk about, I want us to have a face-to-face conversation about where we are, why some of the things that we go through are so triggering for us, and to just kind of give you some measured steps on how we can move forward in life. So, in particular, let's talk about what Black trauma is. First of all, Black trauma is a word that is a phrasing that I coined to describe the highly complex, complicated, and profoundly layered form of distress that disproportionately affects Black Americans. It's important for us to recognize that our trauma is not something that we invented. We didn't create it. We haven't imagined it. It's not something that's outside of the realm of what most people try to tell us in my case, when I studied psychology and counseling in college, there was a part of the language in the things that we studied was that all Black people have mental health issues, which is not true. And so, for me, I recognize just through my own experiences that trauma is something that we carry. We sort of carry it like it's luggage, an old piece of luggage that we should have discarded a long time ago, but we never did because we didn't know how to release it. So we're going to talk about that today. So some of the things that I came up with to really kind of describe what Black trauma is, I say that it's the residue left behind from decades of racial, historical, socioeconomic discrimination, prejudice, bigotry, bias, compounded by generational secrecy, silence, and shame. It's the physical, emotional, and psychological scarring and wounds we carry inside of us that we thought we had overcome and survived, when in truth we only suppressed it and internalized decades of hurt, shame, pain, and loss. And lastly, it's rooted in a psychosis of racism, the arrogance of white superiority, and the obsessive behavior of those who aspire to dominate, control, subjugate people of color. And for me, it's the equivalent of a disease, something that, if not treated properly, eventually metastasizes throughout our entire being. So that just gives you sort of an overview of what's happening with us when we're experiencing Black trauma. I'd like to make a distinction between that, excuse me, and the distinction that it's experienced by other ethnicities. You will notice that I will purposely not use the word race because I believe there's just one human race. There's not different races, as some people would like us to think. So I often refer, when I'm making distinctions between different people, I will speak to ethnicity and culture. So I think that there's a lot of, excuse me, there's a lot of things that we need to address with respect to our trauma that is dissimilar from other ethnicities. Uh, and I think in our case in particular, there's always the issue of racism. I don't know if many of you have ever thought about it, but we're the one race that has had this constant, continuous uh, um, obstruction and had racism imposed upon us. We've never been able to come out of it. And one of the reasonings that I came to, or the conclusions that I came to, as I did my own study into Black trauma, was the recognition that it's a discussion that really has to be had um, by our white counterparts, simply because they're the ones that instituted. We didn't start it, so they have to have the discussion among themselves. And until they decide that they are going to not address this, not make it a thing anymore, and impose it upon people, we will have to deal with it. So the reality for us as Black people is we now need to determine, how do we move past this? How do we function and maneuver around all of this in spite of the fact that it's part of our everyday experience? So the next thing I wanted to talk about is to really talk about factoring the risk. Let's go to our next slide. One of the things I wanted to bring up too, sorry to go back to the previous slide, with regards to Black trauma, I wanted to really kind of address the fact that some of you probably think that, well, I'm not having any struggles with Black trauma. It's not a concern that I need to be worried about. And I'd like to have an opportunity to prove you wrong with that, because one of the things that I discovered about myself is that sometimes there's things that's going on inside of you that tie directly to trauma, but you may not necessarily identify with, because you're in a mode of surviving it and trying to deal with it and overcome it. And so you don't recognize. So I want to just list some of the things that will show you that these are triggering points. They're indications of brokenness that you need to resolve within yourself. So here's some of the behavior traits that I came up with that sort of are characteristics of you internalizing trauma and brokenness. So if you are ill-tempered, you're always hurling insults at other people, disrespecting people, talking down to other people, you're exhibiting signs of trauma. If you mistreat, mishandle, abuse, devalue, or take others for granted, you're exhibiting signs of trauma. If you're quick to accuse but slow to forgive, you're exhibiting signs of trauma. If you constantly seek validation and approval, you are exhibiting signs of trauma. If you harbor grudges, hatred, jealousy for decades, can't forgive folks the stuff they did a long time ago to you that probably happened, nobody even remembers it anymore, you're exhibiting signs of trauma. If you lie constantly and can't tell the truth to save your life, you're exhibiting signs of trauma. If you refuse to grow up, mature, evolve, change, take responsibility for your own actions, and instead always placing the blame on someone else, that's a sign of trauma. A few more. If you're self-centered and entitled, that no one else in the world matters but you and your needs, that's a sign of trauma. If you have no aspirations to better yourself or to pass on the wisdom of which you know and you've learned throughout your life experience to pass it on to the next generation, you're exhibiting trauma. If you think someone owes you something because you suffered at the hands of some horrific event, even though you have more than most people do, you're exhibiting trauma. And if you despise the thought of getting older and obsess over staying younger because your ego is too immature and irresponsible to recognize the responsibilities and accountabilities of being an adult in the room, you're exhibiting trauma. So I'm sure you all can probably add to that, but that will just give you a little bit of what to look for to recognize that you may need to do a little bit extra work for yourself. So now let's go to the next slide, which is factoring in the risk. And one of the things I wanted to talk about that is that we're living in a day and time where you really need to be really proactive in your emotional, your physical, and your mental health. You can't assume that just because somebody is claims to be a professional or has a series of degrees behind their name, that they know they know necessarily what's good for you, what's best for you, or that they're working for your best interests. One of the things I say in my slides is that while I have a great respect for the mental health profession, as well as the supportive roles of those who are therapists or counselors or the like, the reality for me is that I really can't, and this is based on things that I've discovered for myself, I can't really in good conscience say that this is the best or the only option for Black people due to the disparities and the inequities that's involved in not only mental health therapy, but also in the medical profession. So, one of the things I want to bring to your attention is that I came across one statistics from the Counseling Today, which is a publication by the American Counseling Association, and they said racial disparities or unfair differences within the system of mental health are well documented. Research indicates comparing white people to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that we are less likely to have access to mental health services, we're less likely to seek out services, and less likely to receive needed care. And then on the flip side of that, our level of care is usually of so low quality that we will leave the service prematurely before we've even had a chance to get any benefits from it. And so again, that's from Counseling Today. That's, for your benefit to recognize that this is not imaginary. This is not something I'm making up. This is actually its scientific proof. And so from there, I would say, given the disparities, inequities, and fears associated with therapy by Black populations, perhaps the better option might be for us to simply have a conversation with each other. And that's kind of what I focus on. My goal in my business is to really have conversations amongst my people to be able to talk about where we are, what we're feeling, what our emotional and mental state of mind is, and just really talk it out. One of the interesting aspects in my study, as I was working, I was also in 2020, I started writing a book, sort of reflecting on some of the challenges that I had from early childhood up until my adulthood. One of the issues that I had to deal with that I really wanted to talk about was my challenges with dealing with depression. I had experienced bouts of depressions all throughout life until I was about 28 years old. And I didn't find out until I started writing this book, which I was well into my 60s by then, was that you can actually be traumatized within the womb of your mother. And again, there's scientific proof of that. They call it encoding. And so I recognized for the first time in my life that some of the trauma that my mother had me illegitimately, and there was some trauma surrounding the relationship she had with my birth father, that sort of got, if you will, encoded into me. So I came out of the womb being depressed and never really knowing why I was depressed. So when my mom married my stepfather, which is the only father I've ever known, I just never knew where it came from, because they never treated me poorly or made me feel in a position of having a low self-esteem. But still, I had this self-hatred of myself where I didn't really like who I was. I didn't like the way I looked. I felt bad about my parents didn't have a lot. So, I wouldn't say that I was poor, but I just didn't have some of the things that most of the other kids had. So there was a lot of different issues going on with me that nobody had sat down to have a conversation with me to explain to me what I was going through, not to mention the fact that I grew up in an era of segregation. So I grew up in the midst of Jim Crow laws. and the struggles that come, all the struggles that come along with that. Then eventually transitioning over to white schools, where at the time my father was in the military, so the majority of my education came from a military background. But when we settled back here in the States, segregation was still going on, and a lot of all the things that I had learned, I wound up, if you will, losing it, because I wound up being put into a four-room black schoolhouse with all black teachers. With that part was great, but the drawback was, it was that because I was so much farther advanced in my learning, my teachers didn't teach me anything new. So by the time I transitioned over, integration happened, and I transitioned over into the white elementary school, I had become a slow learner. Now, as a child, I didn't even recognize that that was a struggle that I was having. And I don't think my parents did either, because they were busy working. But it was one of my teachers who sort of called a meeting between my mother and I, and basically said, as a result of having not learned anything new for 2 years, she's become a slow learner. And so now we have to work with her to kind of bring her back up to speed. So I would say probably for the most part, I don't know if I really actually came up to speed until maybe I hit college. That's just how long the progress. So when I say to you, I have some understanding of some of the trauma that you can go through, trust me, I do have a very deep understanding of it. And so again, getting back to why I want to have these conversations, I think that we all have stories and experiences that we need to share. Another thing that was interesting, it'll be in my book. My book is not published at the moment. I'm still working on it. But one of the other issues that I explored was the issue of generational secrecy, silence, and shame. Those conversations that your parents should have had with you, or your grandparents should have had with you. Something happened in the family that nobody wanted to talk about, and they just kind of slid it on the rug. If you all are familiar with what's happening with Kirk Franklin right now, as well as Kerry Washington, they're two live examples of what's taking place when secrecy and no transparency comes forth when it comes down to your story, because your story ties into your identity. So on with the next slide. Let's talk about healing and recovery. Healing can be a lifelong cyclical process when we are not open to change. The greater the greater the denial that we are fine and in control of our emotions and mental health, and don't need any type of help, don't need to talk about it, the greater the likelihood that you will never heal or recover from your trauma. It takes a great deal of introspection, honesty, accountability, and responsibility before the healing process can take place. As Black Americans, we are so accustomed to spending our entire lives trying to reclaim, recoup, and recover what was lost or stolen from us, that we seldom recognize or acknowledge the unbridled brokenness inside of us that is intricately tied to trauma. And the truth of the matter is, we cannot heal from what we don't know, understand, acknowledge, confront, or talk about, which is exactly why conversations in Black communities and Black settings are so vitally important to our healing process, in addition to the measured steps we need to fully take in order to recover. So I came across some of the I would say the measured step that I came across for my own healing, that I want to kind of just delve into a little bit to help you. You can apply them for your own self, or just listen to what I came up with for myself. But one of the first things that I had to deal with was transparency. Now, I'm not sure what your faith is or what your beliefs are, but I happen to be a person of faith. And so when I started writing my book, one of the things that God was dealing with me very heavily about was to be able to talk about, share my stories without any hurt or pains or issues going along into being written into the story. So initially my whole issue was like, okay, look, I'm not trying to have anybody in my business. People don't need to know the details of what I've come through. And I think the thing that broke me was that the Lord finally spoke to me and said, if you truly believe that you're saved, delivered, and healed, why are you ashamed of your testimony? Your testimony speaks of me. It shows others what I can do through someone who's submitted to me and willing to allow me to walk with them throughout life. And he said, for every day that you refuse to um, accept um, speaking to your own story, you not only do a disservice to me and yourself, but you do a disservice to all the people that I've called you to, that you can be a blessing to. And there was something about hearing that in my spirit that kind of broke me out of this whole notion of like, I don't want nobody to know what my business. Because the reality is that we're not alive to benefit ourselves. We're not alive because we just survive a particular situation. We're really alive because we are meant to become greater than ourselves, greater than even the examples that were left from us from generations before and our ancestors. We should be able to. One of the things I teach in my book is how you have to learn how to forgive the generations behind you, because they can only give you what was poured into them. If they didn't have anyone speak into their life, they certainly cannot speak into yours. So we have to learn how to forgive our parents, our grandparents, all those that came, even our aunts and uncles, for not giving us what we needed at the time. It wasn't their fault. They could only give you what they had received. Um, and so, one of the things that I talk about in as far as transparency, I talk about that emotions are outward expressions of what you're feeling on the inside, and emotions always need an outlet. So you have to find a way to find your voice so that you can talk about what you're feeling, how something, an experience impacted you, and how you responded to that. Were you able to move forward beyond that? So I always say, pay attention and take stock of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, how you're reacting to certain people, certain situations, in different situations that you happen to be in. And if necessary, find somebody that you can talk to. If you're not comfortable going to a counselor, whether it's a spiritual counselor or mental health counselor or even a therapist, find somebody that you can bring in confidence, that that you can trust, that you can share some things that you're feeling, and it won't be all over the town, if you will. And the other side of that is that even if somebody shares your experience, why would you be ashamed of that? That's part of what makes you who you are. And the ability to be honest and transparent and say, okay, I went through this, but I've recovered from it. It no longer hurts me. It's a part of what strengthens me and enables me to be able to share my experiences and my testimony with somebody else. So how you translate your negative experiences into positive ones will determine your level of recovery. Learn to forgive, listen more, love more, hate less. And these are the recovery lessons that I discovered that really kind of became my measured steps for recovery. So the next thing is, let's talk about change. Change is strategic in that it has a specific, targeted, and assignment to accomplish. And it's designed. One of the things that I learned is as I begin to think about the changes that I went through without life, whether they were good, bad, traumatic, or happiness, all of those type of things, no matter how change decides what form it takes, how it comes into your life, the reality is, if you really think about it, that it's really about helping you to grow, to mature, to evolve, and to change. The goal of change is not necessarily to force you to do better or become better, but to help you to become a better version of yourself, to define your difference so you can be a positive influence in the lives of other people. So the truth of the matter is there are highs and lows to change, meaning that it can come in many different forms, sometimes through death, tragedy, and pain, at other times through the simple pleasures of life, joy, peace, and happiness. And there's two things that you need to remember when it comes to change. Whatever resides in you is going to come out of you. Some of us need to change because what's coming out of us is no longer productive or beneficial, and it's not effective. Number two, however change comes, whatever form it chooses to take, if it finds its way to your doorstep, that means there's something in you that needs to be addressed. And so confront it. Don't be afraid of it. You know, we all have occasions where we're emotionally charged by something, something we find disturbing. You know, I think the thing that I've come to understand about change is that, you know, we don't come in change. When change happens in your life, it's not that you can immediately dismiss it and pretend like, oh, okay, you know, let me just, you know, look at the positive part. No, you're going to go through periods where you're going to be distraught, you're going to be sad, but as you're working through the process, at least give yourself the opportunity to say, okay, let me take a step back and look at this whole situation. So what is the lesson that I need to learn as a result of the experience? What is it that, what part of this experience is going to help me to move to a different level or to become a better person within my own self? If you're someone like me that follows a lot of people on YouTube or LinkedIn, one of the things I hear a lot of successful people say is that they've learned, they become who they are as a result of their traumatic experiences. So trauma it can play a positive role in your life if you're willing to give it the space to be able to let it do what it's supposed to do inside of you. And the reality, the other piece of that is that we're really not supposed to be complacent. We're not supposed to be so stagnant in life that we can't change and we can't evolve and we can't mature. You know, you're not supposed to have the mindset of a 16-year-old or a 20-year-old when you're in your 60s or, you know, older. We need to learn how to make adjustments as life goes on and our lives change and our circumstances change. And so that is a large part of what I want to talk about with regards to a change. One final thought on that. Just recognize that life is not perfect. As long as there are imperfect people in the world, we're going to have an imperfect life. So don't expect that your life is going to be pristine. You're not going to ever have days of sadness or unhappiness or, you know, sadness with the loss of a loved one. It's going to happen. It's a part of your life. But I think that depending on how you choose to approach it will depend on whether you can move past that and you can recover from it. So let's talk real quickly about our choices. Choices determine how you think. Everyone is gifted with, and this is a really critical thing I think for you all to remember, everyone is gifted with the freedom of choice, which in spiritual terms, we call it free will. That means that you have the right to choose whatever path in life that you want to choose. That's a God-given right that you have. God made you that way so that you could choose the Bible speaks it in terms of, you know, I set before you blessings and cursings, good and evil, but choose life. That's how it phrases it. And so the same thought process goes into your choice now. God is not going to hunt you down and force you to do anything. the choice is always yours, whether you want to choose him or someone else. If you want to choose a wrong path or right path, it's always, but always remember that with every choice comes consequences, and you're going to have to pay those consequences, whatever they may be. And I like to, a good example of when it comes down to choice, I like to always think about it from the perspective of Cain and Abel. What I think is so interesting about that particular story is that Cain had a choice. He made a conscious choice to kill his brother Abel. He didn't have to do it. He could have made a decision to go in a different direction, but he made that choice. And so for the rest of his life, he had to pay for the not only the torment of his wrong decision, but also he missed an opportunity for where he could have been in life, as opposed to him now deciding, let me just take another person's life. I think in today's society, we take life for granted. We don't seem to place the same value on human life that maybe we once did, or particularly when God created us. He didn't create us to dominate each other, to control each other, to manipulate each other, whether it's male or female. That was never God's plan for us. His plan was that, according to Genesis, would be that we be fruitful, that we multiply, replenish the earth, and dominate over the other creations, the animals, and the care of the earth. That was really our original assignment. And so if you think about it in terms of where we are now today, we've deviated from that. Now everybody's kind of doing their own thing and trying to be in control and making money. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but I don't think that you should ever get to a mindset that you have to undermine somebody else in order to get what you want. If that's what the route you have already, you've made a wrong choice about some things. So let's talk about identity. Identity is the unseen projections of who and what you are, what you believe, what you're connected to, what you're drawn to, what you identify with. Right connections can lead to fruitful outcomes, just as wrong connections can result in tragic or traumatic outcomes. So pay close attention to who and what you are connected to, because your choices reveal your identity. Behind your being speaks the true essence of who you are. Before you ever speak a word, your identity really speaks for you. Next thing is on narratives. Narratives are defined as a way of presenting, and this is actually a dictionary perspective of it, or definition of it. It says it's a way of presenting or understanding a situation or series of events that reflects and promotes a particular point of view or set of values. So how I translate that is to say that narratives refine the story of you. It encompasses your experiences, your ancestral history and lineage, your relationships, all of that. So without it, you have no identity. You have no clear understanding or definition of why you exist, what makes you distinctively different from other people, or what defines your purpose on earth. And so understand that whatever your storyline is, whatever you determine that that's going to be, it transcends the color of your skin. So one of the things that I became aware of, I have a section where I actually talk about racism, my experiences with it. I came to the conclusion that the color of my skin, my experience with racism, is not the definitive to who I am. There's so much more to me. There's a spiritual part of me. There's the part that loves people, loves to be in conversation with people. So there's a whole identity around the story that makes up me, that makes Bettye who she is. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about Ujima, which is one of the principles of Juneteenth. And when I came across this, I thought to myself, I said, this is so important, I think, to the Black community, because I think strayed away from this concept. So one of the things that I came to understand about Ujima was that it speaks to our collective and shared responsibilities as a people and a community. We have a shared responsibility in building and maintaining our own communities, making our community problems our problems, committing to solving our own problems, investing into and supporting our own people, and creating a better future for ourselves, our children, and humanity in particular. Now, as a caveat to that, I want to also say that this does not mean, when I make a statement like that, it does not mean to suggest that, we're off to ourselves as a Black community. We don't have anything to do with any other ethnicity or culture. That's not the point I'm trying to make, because the one thing that I recognize about us as Black people is that we are benevolent people. We have always been giving, always been supportive, always been loving. It's part of who we are. So for us to decide that we're going to only selectively be this way with each other is abnormal to who we are, who God created us to be. But I do say that I think in today's society, there needs to be more of a concerted effort for us to focus in on addressing the issues in us first before we branch out and try to help other people. I believe very firmly that you can only be a benefit and asset to other people when you've gotten yourself together. If you've got issues going on in you, you're only going to spread that into the lives of other people. And so it's very important for us to recognize the significance of healing and recovering ourselves before we try to help somebody else recover and heal from their own issues. And so that is, I think that might be all. Yeah, that's all I have. I do on my last slide. Let's see. I do want to just say thank you for the opportunity to be able to share some of my thoughts. I'm probably not as good as a speaker as I am a writer. So I hope that when my book comes out, you all will have an opportunity to buy it and read it and perhaps get some more insights from it. But if you have some interest in connecting with me or continuing the conversations, we can do it through my business, through one-on-one consultation, small group coaching support, or if you want to be a donor and help me to donate into the efforts of what I'm doing, because I want to eventually take my conversations beyond a local venue into other states and other nationwide. I'd love to have your support as a donor, or if you'd like to sponsor what I call the Life Courts Healing Conversations on Black Trauma. I'd be more than welcome to sit with you, have a discussion about that. And as always, I'd love to hear your feedback and your testimonials, or if you got anything from it. Hopefully you got something from what I shared today. And of course, if you want to have me add you to my email list, so when my book does come out, I can notify you, you can purchase it. But again, thank you so much. I know that many of you had other things that you could have been doing. So I appreciate the time that you've taken in allowing me to talk. So thank you and have a great day.
Oh, wow. I'm like, I've had so many walkaways and so many moments in this conversation where I was like totally talking to you from this side of the screen and from behind the scenes. I'm definitely a huge believer in addressing and looking at the community that I'm a part of. We look at it we call it birth ecology, and what our lives were like while we were in the womb. And another group of women that I'm part of, we also look at it as when we're healing or when we're experiencing anything, it's from 7 generations ago.
Yes.
So healing, we also get an opportunity to heal for 7 generations ahead. So just the topic of this conversation was just right on time. We're about to go into the cold months, which a lot of times starts to kind of like it adds to depression a lot of times. They
Yes.
let you know, when we go into that hibernating phase, it can kind of look like and align with depression if we're not careful
Hmm. Right.
and mindful of keeping ourselves up spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So
Hmm.
this has really been a great conversation today. As Miss Walker said, if you guys have any questions, um, you did address one of Athenia's questions. She had a question about what are some of the ways that we can move through Black Pride, and you did address that. But I would love if you could kind of give a couple more gems that stuck out for you for folks who may not have been here for the whole hour. Like,
Hmm.
what are some that they could walk away with that could help them move through some of this trauma that we're carrying?
Well, I would say again, my focus, and I think that as a community, our focus needs to be on talking. We need to give voice to our emotions and our feelings. Many of us have either, whether it's through racism or our families or our own personal challenges, we've gotten to a place where we don't talk about things. We don't. We decide to, instead of addressing what we're feeling and what our thoughts about it, we just tuck everything on the inside. And what we don't realize is that that trauma builds up over time. So when you find yourself start lashing out to people, or you react in a very odd way towards people, people look at you cross like, oh, what's wrong with her? That's because there's something going on with you that you haven't addressed. And so I think it is very important that at minimum, let's start having conversations about trauma. Let's talk about what we think, what we feel, how things make us feel, and as a community, come together. Like I said, the important thing that I love about Ujima is it's like, let's make the problems of our community our problems. We can't distance ourselves from each other as though, I got my issues, you deal with your issues, and we move forward. That's not community. Community means, and community to me is the extension of family. We are family when we're connected. We're family when we love on each other, when we cry with each other, and we take on each other's compassion, and our challenges, and we work together. For the Black community, I think there's nothing more important than for us to recognize that we need each other. When we're beat up by the world and we come home, there's nothing more warm and welcoming than to have the embrace of family. To have your mother kiss you on your forehead and your dad hug you. That's what happens when you deal with eczema, and we come into community. And I think that those of us who are in the healing process or have come to a place where we kind of see things more clearly, we have to help our other brothers and sisters to embrace that too, because it's not a matter that we don't have the capacity for it. We just simply don't know how. Nobody's talked to us about this kind of stuff. And we've been struggling trying to figure out, well, how do I get to this? How do I get to be, or how do I get to see when I haven't figured out how to get to be yet?
I love that. I
Hmm.
love that. How do we get to see if we don't know how to be? I love that. And on that note, I would love for you to share with us. You mentioned Ujima. I would love for you to share with the community what is Kwanzaa for you.
Um, I would say, you're talking about in relation to Juneteenth, Kwanzaa.
In relation to Juneteenth, in relation for you, Kwanzaa is another one of those conversations that every
Mhm.
household didn't grow up observing or
I'm
honoring.
one. I'm one of them.
Yeah, I am. I
Yeah.
am as well. And just wanting to, what is your understanding of it, or what is it that you ended up using Ujima and referencing one of their
Mhm.
actual principles? What does Kwanzaa just as a whole mean for you?
Yeah. I think for me, it's really about, again, getting back to community. And, one of the things that, and I said this earlier, was that when and I hate to say that it took this long for me to kind of make that connection, but I'm going to just be honest, it did. There was something about the mental health happening in the Black community that just triggered something in me back in 2020. And I think I recognized for the first time in my life, I've always loved my people. I've always had a sense, because I grew up with that type of thing with the, in some respects with the Black community. Um, but I don't think I personalized it for myself to recognize how deeply entrenched and tied I am to that I do have a responsibility to know my history, to know my lineage, to know who I'm connected to. And I can't just like look at my brother and sister, watch them fall and not have any sensitivity towards that. And so something shifted in me in 2020 that now I've been on this bent. And, I write in my book, I don't mean to suggest that with other ethnicities and cultures that I don't care about them, or that they're not important, or their feelings and their experiences, their identity is not relevant. What I am saying is that the Black community has not had the privilege of loving on each other for many reasons. And so for me right now, I just want to take from what I have learned, what I have discovered about myself, my experiences, and I have many stories of things, that some of the horrors that I went through growing up. Not from my immediate families, but just other extended family members, and how I was through writing it out. Again, another facet of talking it out. I was able to reason within myself, okay, this is why this happened. So one of the conclusions I came to was that in order to be able to do what I do now, to understand what I know now, I had to go through certain things. So it's part of my processing. And so for me, Kwanzaa and Juneteenth, all of that is really about us reconnecting with our inner selves, with who we really are. And that's why I said narratives are important, identity is important. You can't disconnect from yourself. And regardless of how other people make you feel, or what they try to impose upon your thoughts, you should be free enough within yourself as a Black person to say, this is who I am. This is this is the path that I'm meant to walk. And if that's your opinion, you're entitled to it, but it doesn't diminish me, because this is who I am. And that's so for me, that's really kind of where I want to see our community to get to, is to get to the place that we love each other, we listen to each other, we care about each other. And that's what it means for me.
Ashe. And one last final question. Juneteenth. What exactly does Juneteenth mean to you?
Same thing. I'm not as well versed with Juneteenth as probably a lot of you all are, because I didn't grow up with that. I didn't even have Black history in high school. I grew up in a all white. When my father retired and we moved back to the States, I wound up, after the Black schoolhouse experience, I wound up going to an all white high school, which never taught any form of Black history whatsoever. Then when I went to college, I graduated my undergraduate studies I did at Norfolk State University. We didn't have Black history then. At that time, we're talking back in the 70s. And I remember very vividly, there was this white instructor who attempted to teach Black history. And I think after a couple of weeks, he quit, because I guess he figured, I don't have enough familiarity with this subject to be able to teach it. So I've grown up not having any sensibility. I've had to kind of figure stuff out on my own, learn on my own. So I wouldn't say that I necessarily have an intimate connection with Juneteenth, but I do now. So I'm at that beginning stages of really understanding what it means to be a Black woman, to know that that I'm a life giver, that I'm fruitful, and that I have something to give to my community. So I would say that.
Ashe. Well, thank you, Ms. Walker. This has been a great conversation, very much needed. And I hope that this will go viral, get played, be shared. Everyone out there that's watching right now, if you could please just share with your communities And thank you for being here with us today. I will see
Thank
you
you.
behind the scenes very shortly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Amen. All right, community. I hope that you guys had a lot of walkaways from this conversation today. Like I said, please like, share, and subscribe. Um, the show for today. And next week with us, we will have Kiara Green. She'll be here discussing her journey as an African American female entrepreneur. So we'll be here next week, same time, same place. See you then. Thanks for being here with us today. Greetings, and good afternoon, Juneteenth family. Welcome to another weekly edition of our Lunch and Learn.
E is exhaling, having an opportunity to breathe, to rest, to refill yourself and rejuvenate yourself because no one can pour from an empty cup.
As you evolve and become more of yourself, you begin to attract the people that are there for you.
Amen.
So everything you need is in the space.
You have to learn from your mistakes. Once you make a mistake, sit down, recoup, and then start over. And once you do that, you say, I got that.
See, Juneteenth means to me, I would definitely say empowerment and education.
When I experienced it, like just coming together and, being a part of something bigger than myself,
A new start, starting a new chapter, opportunity, new beginnings.